All right. So I'm looking at the screen and I'm seeing present is myself, Jeff, David, Robert, Dano, Emma. So we are missing one member, but I think we have a quorum. So I think we can start. So I'm looking at,
Jared say he had some kind of surgery planned
He
today?
he might have. He had one last one of the meetings he missed with the school, but I thought he said he might be out for this meeting as well.
okay. All right. Well, I think we can call the meeting to order 7:02 on 29th of January. Present Finn Sprague. See present. I see Dano. I see Bob. I see Dave. So we have a quorum. All right. So if I look at the agenda, we're starting with public comment, which I'm perfectly happy to do now or to do later after perhaps there's more information that might address some of the concerns of the public. But I'll just pause here to see if anybody has any public comment.
And as of now, we don't have anybody on, appears to be on that would be the public.
Okay. All right, then we can move on to the next item, which is to start talking about the new elementary school project. So I worked on a couple of files over the weekend and then sent them over to Jeff for his thoughts. We talked earlier this week. And then Bob, I saw that you responded back with a bunch of comments on it. I'll throw them up on the screen. But one of the things I was hoping to talk about was if you guys would agree on sort of a likely process going forward. And we had talked about it a bit last time around, which is that relatively soon, this committee should expect to issue an opinion on the new school project. And then we're going to want to have some sort of document available to the public explaining our reasoning. You know, whether or not that format is fit into the warrant book or fit onto our website and mentioned in the warrant book or whatever format is most appropriate. And then the third step is going to be some sort of discussion or presentation at the April town meeting. So those are the three milestones that I can think of for this committee to be concerned about. I'm hoping to get some comment from other folks as they've been thinking about it.
There's Jared.
Okay.
Any other way to look at it, Finn? I mean, that sounds pretty logical and pretty much what sounds like we've been asked to do, the way you've outlined it, so.
Cheers. Thanks, Dana. So not hearing any other comment from other members, that's going to be the thing I'm aiming for. I'm not yet sure that the Finance Committee is ready to hit that first milestone and issue an official opinion, but I think everyone should be keeping that on their radar as something that, you're going to need relatively soon. So one of the things that I'd ask for you guys to think about is what more information will you need in order to render that opinion? We've been discussing the deck, for instance, that we sent around earlier today. But one of the things that is missing that I think Jeff is ready to start discussing is, the first few years tax impact that this would have on a typical Wenham resident, or per $1,000, or percent increase, those sorts of discussion. I think that's something that we're all going to probably want to have, in our hand ahead of issuing an opinion. Does anybody disagree on that point?
Don't disagree, but I have a comment that I think part of that is the type of financing, whether you're going to front load it or not, because I was going through the presentation from the Hamilton FinCom, And it looks like, it looked to me like they were using the front-end loaded financing because they were talking about sort of average impact over 20 years and what's the impact of the first year and the last year. So, that may or may not affect our decision, but it's certainly going to affect the presentation on tax impact to residents.
Yeah, and I can speak to that at sort of a high level, Bob. So that's definitely true. What they've talked about would be sort of a level principal debt structure, which would be higher loaded in the front side and lower over time, in an effort to save total interest paid. So that what we'll see is right now, it looks to me, over time, this is going to add something around like $1.68 to the tax rate on average over 20 years. The issue is, as you mentioned, that it's sort of higher we're making higher payments in the early years, which makes the early year, tax rate impact higher. So, you're starting off at, let's say $2.16 on the tax rate. And by the end of the term of the note, you're paying 1.19, $1.19 on the tax rate. So that average is $1.68 over the time frame. And just to give you a rough idea, that average is about 1,700 or so for the average tax. It's just under 1,700, excuse me, for the average taxpayer, and just under 1,500 a year for a median taxpayer. But in year one, it's probably closer to say 2,200 for the average taxpayer, and just under 2,000 for the median taxpayer. And I say that like everybody has an idea what the average and median taxpayer is. The average single family household in Wenham is assessed at $1.8 million, and the median single family home is assessed at $891. So those are sort of where we're coming from. But as soon as we have the final like flushed out numbers from the new MSBA funding and then the new loan documents, I think we'll be ready to sort of release that whole schedule. And it sounds like Hamilton is sort of moving towards a similar presentation to us with kind of this average over time, but letting people know what the annual piece is. I think in a lot of the analysis, we've just been assuming sort of 20-year regular mortgage just to keep it simple, but it may not, be that way in practice once we, if we were to get moving on this.
So
Can I ask
on
a
that,
simple? Oh, go ahead. I got a different related question, so keep going.
no, well, I just have, it's kind of a coordination question because like I think that there's likely going to be people who say, wait, why is the Wenham numbers different from Hamilton and why is this like impacting us? Like, or in terms of even assumptions over the long-term interest rate kind of construction cost changes, like, is there a world where we should be coordinating around this, having some kind of debate coming to a level that is consistent between the two towns from a finance committee perspective? Or should we think about it as like, we're totally independent, these are our best faith kind of statements, and yeah, Hamilton may be making different assumptions in terms of their board? I don't know if I have a super strong view. I kind of don't want to follow them, but I just figure I'd mention that. If you have any thoughts on that.
The only thing I would say is it lends a lot more credibility to each town's finance department's recommendation if they, to some degree, line up with the other town. If you've got sort of different approaches floating around in each town, I think that lends itself to more people having questions and potentially saying no if they might have otherwise said yes because they're confused. So I think Finn can probably speak to. I know he's talking to John McGrath, fairly frequently at this point. So I feel like we're working towards it, but I don't know if it's completely ironed out.
Okay, yeah, my biggest question is because I believe in John McGrath, and this is some of the things we discussed kind of last week. But John McGrath seemed to have like a very kind of aggressive calculations for some of the interest rates and whatnot that I think arguably can make the new school look even more attractive than kind of like just a straight kind of construction inflation perspective and some of these other inputs. So okay, I just want to kind of get that out there.
Dano, did you have something before I talk about coordination with Hamilton?
Sure. Yeah, it was more since we were talking about the impact on the average homeowner. I was just wanting to see if I was thinking about, or it's relevant, I think, because it's not just the impact of the school, but it's the impact of a 2.5% increase compounded yearly for 10 years, and where are we going to be in 10 years? And as I think about representing citizens and thinking about how are they thinking about this, is that simple approach that sound right to you guys, where you take the tax bill today and you grow it at 2.5% a year compounded for, call it 10 years, and then you add on top of that whatever this $2,000, $1,700, et cetera, is per year for the average or for the median, and that's kind of where a taxpayer can expect themselves to be in 10 years. I get it's a
Yeah.
function of valuation of your property versus, changes in valuation of your property versus changes in the tax rate. But on average, across the whole town, we're going up 2.5% a year. So anyway, is that simplified way of looking at it sound
So Daniel,
logical or right?
what do you think about this? So as I think about what the finance committee is going to be asked to opine on or advise the residents on, there are really four things. The first one is this new school project. The second one was the operating budget for this coming year. The third one is the capital expenditures for the coming year. And the fourth one is the kind of future looking comments and concerns that we think that residents should be aware of, right? And so you may recall last year we were discussing the trash bill contract coming due and PFAS in the water, right? It seems to me possible that we could, fit into that fourth bucket what you're talking about, saying that, if you look over the past 10 years, Wenham has seen an overall budget increase, operating expense budget increase of X%. It might be close to effectively a compounded 2.5%, or it might be lower. I think there are a few years where it's been lower than that. But 22.5% over 10 years is a 28% increase, right? In the tax bill for a resident, right? And so you could say, look, this is the path that the town seems to be taking.
Yeah, I think that works, Finn, the way you categorized it. You could even do it more simply, I suppose, and say it's levy increases and then it's overrides. And the
The
overrides
overrides is a
include
very good point, right?
PFAS and
We've done a bunch of those
PFAS
too.
and trash, and well, I guess I was putting PFAS and trash and school and other things like that, swimming pool, whatever, into the override category, but I guess they're not necessarily. Yeah, I think the thing I'm getting at is I hate it when we say this will only impact you $1 and X. Like, no, we say this, but what about this and this and this and this and this? And that's what we got to get in front of people. All of the things combined, the likely or the worst case, best case, likely case will impact you this, and not today, but 10 years from now.
Yeah.
It's going to be how you're going to do the financing. I don't know who's making the final decision there, but you're either going to look at something that's level, or you can look at something like a sawtooth. Jumps up when the bonds come on, and then it goes down over time until it hits zero when they mature.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know how many people can think beyond a 6-month horizon, 3-year horizon, 5-year horizon, when people move, what people are thinking about for their families, et cetera. I don't think much beyond a 10-year horizon. So to me, I don't know. I'd simplify it and smooth it out over 10 years probably, and just use the same. I get your point. Depends on how you finance it.
Well, no,
We got to make it simple for the citizen.
No, I agree with you, but I think the question I'm asking is what's actually going to happen. Is it going to be front end loaded, or is it not? Because that's going to affect whatever we present. And if we present the wrong version, it's going to make us look silly.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking it would if at the end of 20 years, we will have paid about the same amount of interest in present dollars, present day dollars, or future dollars, however we want to put it. I guess I was proposing we just divide by 20 and make it simple, but that doesn't really. If it's super front loaded or super back loaded, yeah, that doesn't work.
So I think we're talking about two different things. What you're talking about, Dano, is specific to like the presentation of what the Wenham Finance Committee kind of considered in the model we're using, and whether it's front-end loaded or straight lined as it's right now, as opposed to what it really will be. Having to redo all of the time, all of those schedules for a declining balance, a declining annual payment is more complicated, right? I had avoided doing that because I wasn't sure how close we were to one way or another. And that's different, I think, than what Bob, what you were saying, which is that you could come up with a graph that it looks like a sawtooth, right? That says here are our current bond or override obligations for the next 10 or 30 years. And you would be able to see when our current things are going to fall off, right? Because there are bonds out there that will drop to zero after so many years, right? And you could do something like what John McGrath has done and said, we are aware that we're likely to have to do a major investment in the high school in 10 years, right? And so, who knows what that number is, but around this time period, you could expect, to have issue a new bond. So just as something else is falling off, you're going to have something else showing up.
Yeah, and he had that in his package. I guess my question is more basic, is do we know at this point whether we're going to front end load or not?
That's what the indications are, and in all the ones I've been involved with, folks tend to do it. I think the overall interest savings becomes compelling, but I do think there could be some conversations too. I mean, if for whatever reason they come back once we get these final numbers from MSBA, and maybe those first year payments, just look a little overwhelming, maybe, folks would have some conversations and say, it'd be nice to be more aggressive up front, but, we just don't know that we can, make that work. So, my hope would be there would be some discussions around that, but, if people think it's palatable, it certainly saves, lots and lots of interest, by doing that. I mean, just getting back to Dano's point, what I've been sort of working on and envisioning was probably an overly detailed 10-year breakout of, that would capture that kind of descending bond payments and some things rolling on and off and all that. And I, the way my mind worked, I didn't think about it in sort of the much simpler terms that Finn was talking about. And, that probably resonates more with a lot of people, but maybe we could look at that as sort of a hybrid, Finn, almost like we were talking about today with the deck where, page one or we could just show the very simplified, this is roughly how it would look if you want to get a more detailed look of the actual, year over year changes or whatever. You can look at the table on the next page. I had been envisioning sort of one table that was this is just Wenham as it's going to keep moving forward for 10 years. So your tax bill is going to look like X at the end of year 10, just under normal operating conditions. And then the second table would be, now here's that same table, except now we've ladled, the Cutler project on top of that, that extra $2,000 a year or whatever it might be. So people could kind of see the difference, very clearly, at the end of 10 years under just, the baseline, I'm at $23,000 of taxes, but on the Cutler model, I'm at $26,000 of taxes or something like that.
Okay. So I'm gonna, unless there's any other comments, I'm gonna put the file up on the screen, and start taking comments from you folks about it. The way that I had thought of it, let me see if I can put it up on the screen, is this is it's definitely a work in process. I have been kind of hesitating to try to make it look as polished as the end result might be, because I'm not quite sure what everybody else out there is thinking about it. And rather not spend a whole lot of time doing rework. If this is not it, my thought is that this is a file that would meet that second deadline that I mentioned, that we have a public facing document available to folks kind of concurrent with the warrant document, right? Explaining our process and explaining the numbers that we saw as we looked at it. So I have thought about it in the idea that this is really just a 6 or so slide deck, and that anybody that wants to challenge an assumption or wants to understand it better can find details in an appendix. But you can just look at 5 or 6 slides, and get, a summary of what we thought of, all the options we considered, and our final recommendation. So, so I'm just, like I said, I'm just going to throw some of these red boxes in the upper hand corners here with your comments, right? Rather than trying to fix this live or change it live, right? So the first one I heard from David was, trying to figure out where Hamilton lands on these assumptions and trying to be consistent wherever possible across the two towns. Right. So this one, we're talking about just an introduction to taxpayers of what we're doing. We're being asked to weigh in on costs and assumptions, that we're a finance committee, and talking about the likely cash flows, and alternatively what will be spent if the project is not approved by voters. And then this caveat, and this language is something I've been playing around with a lot. This is the idea that we're only considering the financial stuff. We're not considering non-financial benefits or problems, and residents will have to consider these forecasts as just one point in their decision-making process individually in casting their vote.
I like the way that's set up.
Agreed.
So first one, we're basically overview of the numbers that we have for the new elementary school project, right? That it's opening 2028, 142 million, net of a grant of 50 million and a bond of 92. Hey, Bob, I don't have your email up in front of me, so please make sure that you interrupt me when I pass by something, a slide that you had a comment on, okay?
I'm trying to figure, yeah, I can see the slide numbers. Yeah, I've got my list here, so, yeah.
And I thought I was pretty good at PowerPoint, but I cannot figure out for the life of me how to add slide numbers in the bottom right-hand corner. So I've got to brush up on that. I even went to Google and it couldn't figure it out. So I guess the first question that we're going to have to do here is, do I need to redo this entire the model to assume in something instead of a straight line payment? Right, the declining balance that Jeff just mentioned. I think for consistency's sake, I probably have to. It's going to be a lot of work.
When in the decision-making process is that actual decision made? In other words, is that something that's going to change one way or the other, 3 months down the road or a year down the road? If so, we should probably simplify this as much as possible, notwithstanding the numerous options that are potentially available.
Is a question for Jeff?
Yeah,
Yes.
so I was thinking about
Yes.
that. I think it, we're really not going to know for sure, Jared, until probably, 27, 28, like whenever they go to market with this and know the real, they're starting to get the advice on the real, underwriting, that's when they'll, make the decision for sure. I would say they're inclined to the level principal model, as of now. But yeah,
So-
we won't actually know for a couple of years.
But that implies then whatever we put here is highly theoretical and therefore should be as simple as possible. I.e., I like what's written here now.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think as Finn and I talked about offline on this, to me, the big thing is what you folks are doing is sort of stress testing this thing. And if you just use that same assumption, just level funded or whatever, that allows you to do all this testing you want to do. I mean, it won't, be the exact, thing that will happen 3 years from now. But it will be a good faith effort to evaluate the three options, with the similar debt financing. Um, I think we could do the tax rate impact um, on maybe the more accurate way, because I do think it's important to for people to understand that if you tell them that it's going to be 1,500 a year or 1,600 a year, and then in the first year it's 2,200, they're not going to be real happy about that. But I think here, sort of keeping it simple is it probably makes more sense.
Yeah, I mean, does it, not to like overly wordsmith, does it like make sense just add like an average of 6.8 million annual payment? Like I know it's not actually 100% true, but just like allows that caveat. But that might be like overly thinking it. I think I agree with simplicity.
I think the argument that would be made at the time the decision is made that, given all factors, that it's more attractive to do a level principal. So in a way, we're giving them the simple solution, and someone's going to have to make the argument that it's more attractive to do something else.
I can imagine a Excel model that would do this, that I could figure it out a way to do it. I just can't imagine yet a way to do it dynamically that would allow us to mess around with all the assumptions. Um, Sort of like right now, the model kind of assumes that on or on year 7, we can get back into the MSBA loan with some of these options. If we wanted to switch that to 10, the Excel model that does that automatically is significantly more complex. So it may be something that I can do once we've all settled on agreeing on what the numbers we're going to use for all these assumptions, the central numbers. And then we can do it, because I suppose Jeff is going to have, or Jeff, you're going to have to do it right at 92 million, right? The
Yeah,
question, we got all these other options with different payment profiles.
right.
So what I was thinking about in here is that at the bottom of these slides, there would be a note here that would simply say, any questions, questions about the assumptions, you can go to page X in the appendix, right? Where it talks about all of these assumptions, right? And so we're not explaining how we settled on any one of these numbers, right? But in the appendix, it says, this 142 number came from, such and such document from the Hamilton Wenham School District on such and such date, right? Where they said, this is the latest number we have. Right?
Sounds good.
I think that's a good idea.
Are we actually being supported on the $500,000 in consolidation savings? Because I thought there was a little bit of a waffle there from Eric the last time we talked with him.
There's definitely a waffle there. So we have an email from him that says he would support $250,000 to $500,000. Right? But that's just an email from our superintendent. That may be the only thing we get.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
also feel like that's a relative to the bigger scheme of things and relative to the story we're trying to get across. That just creates room for questions and confusion and misunderstanding and whatnot. I mean, the only value of trying to shoehorn that in somewhere is to have it documented and to have some accountability associated with it, but I don't think it'll carry that much weight anyway. So we can always refer back to the email exchange or refer back to whatever whenever we want to, if we want to try to introduce some accountability around that. I
I
think
mean,
putting it on this slide is probably going to create more confusion than help.
but like part of me wants to put the $250,000 number on there and say, Eric, we're just putting your email in the appendix if you're not going to give us something more legitimate than that.
You know, I
Ye-
think there's a benefit to having this here because it suggests to residents that there are some benefits from the new school. It's just not all expense. And I would add that we might want to consider somehow separating the consolidation from the savings that come from having a new structure. Because in some of our options, alternatives there are there are new buildings, and that is going to have maintenance and operating savings just because they're new, not because they're consolidated. So that was one of the things that as I went through, it seemed like we might need to add as another category so that we can then provide those kinds of savings on the other new construction.
You know, I think I recall the language, right, I kept this assumptions page at the bottom, even though I'm not sure that this is the final format of it, right? It may just be a table of contents that just says go to page 13 for such and such and go to page 14 for this other assumption. But this this comment here is, I think, what you're referring to, Bob, right? Where right now I don't have any numbers from any authority would that I can drop in here for, savings we can expect for running a new building versus having to run old buildings. And I don't know how to quantify that off the top of my head. So, by not including them at all, we're basically saying that the cash flow is essentially the same, or it's already covered by some other expense, right?
We could be saying that, but my comment on that particular bullet was also a little different in that because of the fact that you're getting some of these benefits at different points in time, uh, they don't actually wash only at a single particular discount rate that's probably equal to inflation. So that was another comment. I'm not sure we need this comment, is what I was saying, because it opens up the question: is if you're comparing building this new school now, building a new school uh, 7 years, 10 years from now, in which case the ending point is going to be pushed out. It's different from each of the options. So but that was my point: is that that on that particular item that uh, the timing affects the cash flows when you discount them, and therefore they're not comparable.
Okay. I seem to recall somebody at the last presentation by Eric saying, these smart systems that you're installing in the school are expensive to maintain, right? And I don't know if that's a wash against the
Mhm.
increased insulation that you're going to have and reduce, HVAC costs, to run the building. I have no data
Yeah.
thrown into a
Okay.
model.
But in terms of six, I think we could live without that comment.
Sure. Okay.
The-
I've got my flag up here in the right, and I'll work on that later. Okay. So, I will end up doing a declining balance model at some point. And we'll see what I can do once we've kind of agreed on all the assumptions I'm going to be using here. So I only have to do it once. That's a lie. I'm never going to only have to do it once, but I can pretend to myself I need to do it once. All right. So I the major change versus the last one you saw was discussing the MSBA grant here at this point, and so I can pull out repetitive wording in later slides. So we need an alternative plan if it's rejected, and the MSBA grant is available only for this proposed school. It's not like we can just lift and shift it over to a two-school plan immediately. So historically, MSBA has excluded towns from reapplying for 7 to 10 years,
Mhm.
and we're gonna have to fund any capex for the next 7 years with no help from the state if we vote it down. And then these are our most likely scenarios. And I think comment from you, Bob, was, hey, these have changed orders in the deck versus places. So I've got to keep.
The easiest thing might be to just put the renovate as number one, and then it'd be consistent with the appendix, it'd be consistent with the attachment.
Okay,
Uh,
I'll work on it.
It's just that, in terms of cleaning it up and make it easy for people to read, because I noticed that when I jumped back to look at the Excel file, I was often looking at the wrong thing. I was wondering why the number is different. It's because the order was different.
Mhm.
So, and also on the appendix, another comment, you might want to continue the option label throughout the appendix, so the labeling is consistent,
Mhm.
not just the description of the option, but the option number.
Okay.
You know, I was just gonna add for clarity or somehow reference, it's like option one, try for a single new school again in 7 years. Option two, replace Cutler and Winthrop on the 2 sites in 7 years. Option three, renovate Cutler and Winthrop. Just having consistent nomenclature. So if we're gonna reference locations, sites, I don't know, I'm just trying to think.
Mhm.
Option one, like try for a new school on the Cutler site in 7 years.
Mhm. Assume-
Replace Cutler and Winthrop on their existing sites in 7 years. Renovate Cutler and Winthrop in 7 months. Obvious going to be, if it's renovation, it's on their existing sites. So try for a new school on the Cutler site again in 7 years. Replace Cutler and Winthrop on 2 sites. Yeah, okay, that clarifies.
Okay.
Well, I'd suggest removing try for, just make a new school on the Cutler site.
Okay. So, having introduced the 3 options and
Sorry, Finn, one on option two, it's, I mean, if it's new school on the Cutler site in 7 years, then it's essentially option two is new school on the Cutler and Winthrop sites in 7 years, right? New schools. 2 new schools? I don't know.
two new schools on the.
On the, yeah, in 7 years.
Good.
Okay. So option one, one of the reasons I have option one first is it's easiest to kind of transition from. We were just talking about one new school as proposed. Now we're talking about one new school in 7 years, right? So this assumes that we're locked out of the MSBA grant for 7 years. Towns will wait until the grants are available, right? The redesign and reapply the MSBA cost will be about $3 million. This is something Jeff and I were talking about earlier today. We hadn't acknowledged before this point that the Hamilton Wenham School District had to go to the town and ask for this, millions of dollars to start the MSBA process and all the costs and design work to date. We've been considering that as like a sunk cost, right? But if we have to do it all over again for a 1 school plan in 7 years or a 2 school plan in 7 years, then we're going to have to shell out that money again.
Mhm.
And then, and I think, Bob, you had a comment here that I was being inconsistent with this number. I think it's comes from, is that we've got this limp along. Limp along is 2.5 million.
Well, I think it was 3 million on the next page. That
Yeah.
was the comment. And the model has it 2.5 in both, for both options.
Yeah. All right. So, essentially, we're gonna, as a town, this option assumes that we're gonna be doing this again in 7 years. So all we're trying to do is keep minimal investment going in these buildings for 7 years until we can get that the new school together. And this $15 million number is something, I had started with 10. I asked Eric, he said 20, right? I thought that the two towns shelling out $3 million a year for $20 million for essentially as if it was a $20 million bond, that was something that was just not likely to be approved by the voters. That's why I said 10, but so I'm showing here 15, and I think you guys probably saw this in the appendix. I started saying, all right, well, we figure out where it is. Sensitivity proposed cost. This is the sensitivity analysis of what happens if you add another 5 or subtract another 5 to that limp along model, right? So if with the 15 million that I have in the model right now, you see what these 6% discount rate cash flows are net, right? And if you add another 5 million, right, it affects these two models here, right? Another 5 million here or 5 million fewer here. It also affects this retry 2 schools scenario as well. So I have that 15 million, and the backup source for that is Eric saying 20 and me saying I don't believe it. I don't think that's reasonable. So that's how I end up with 15. I don't know where your heads are at, guys. All right. Well, I'll just move on to the next one, right? So I thought about whether I would just say construction inflation is going to be 3%, and ending it there and saying, if you got a problem with that, go look in the appendix, right? But I've got more language here, right? Saying that it was 3 to 5% pre-pandemic, but spiked to just, 50% in 4 years, right? And this is where John McGrath's graph would come in handy. In the appendix, we'd show 3%, 3 to 5%, for 15 years. And then all of a sudden COVID, spiking it like crazy. And here we are at the top of that spike. Is it going to be up like this? Is it going to be more moderate, or is it going to be flat? Right. And so I'm just saying, we'll assume inflation returns to normal. I think, David, you had said, let's do 3%. So that's what I've got in the model right now.
I think that's reasonable.
All
I'm
right.
happy with that.
All right. And so as there would be a single school, we can expect the economies of consolidation to recur. So option 2, try for 2 schools in 7 years. And I think we decided to change the titling here. So I will highlight that as language I've got to change. All right. So similar option 1, we have to wait 7 years and we have to spend $3 million to get into the grant program. Similar option 1, we have to fund a limp along of about, and this is 2.5 million per year. All right. To replace both schools, least expensive estimates for Cutler and Winthrop, and then we'd find that in the appendix, right? If they wanted to see where that came from. And if construction inflation returns is 3%, 209 is 257, or 167 million after the MSBA grant. Bond for 20 years at 3.5% interest. I'm assuming a reduction in interest from what we're seeing now in the market. Yields an 11.7 million annual payment. And as there would not be a single school, we won't enjoy the $500,000 economies of consolidation. You guys, please speak up. All right, I'm going to just keep going. So this one,
I mean, my only question is on assumptions around the interest rate on the bond. Like, I'm not sure I'm comfortable willingly just trying to call where interest rates will be in 7 years versus just saying use 4% as the assumption or whatever number that we're using elsewhere.
Right. So my source for this is that I went and found a graph that said, here's what AAA bond averages have been for 30 or 40 years, right? And that they were typically 3.5%. Right? And so right now we're at an elevated interest rate, and to give these future alternatives the benefit of the doubt, to be, to make them look better against the proposed, elementary school, I say we go down to the historic interest rate.
Where there's-
And again, the idea of putting that in the appendix so that I don't have to try to shoehorn it into this single slide here. So option 3, renovate Cutler and Winthrop. So this one gets a little bit annoying, right? So the cost to bring Cutler and Winthrop up to code are about 94 million, but that does not include increasing capacity, utilization, HVAC, security, modernization, anything like that. That's the $209 million option from option 2, right? So here we are starting now saying we're not going to do that. We're not going to be doing a big project to renovate those buildings. We're going to start with the ADA compliance and the code compliance, and that's it. And then 7 years, we're going to do it again, right, with the other school.
Would it make sense to, since we're telling you what you're not getting, to maybe just have a sentence that says what you are getting?
Okay. This is the wrong place. The thing that I'm really struggling with here is I'm not sure that I like the model as I have it now. I'm not sure it's reasonable, and I'll explain to you why, right? So when I talked to Eric about this and I said, okay, all we do is bring them up the code. And he says, well, you're going to have to renovate them over time anyways, right? You are going to have capacity issues, right? Security issues, HVAC issues. Those things are going to happen, and you can't just say, we'll just bring them up to code and that's it, right? He says, the difference between the 94 million and the 109 million is another $115 million worth of work that would have to be done on these buildings over the next 20 years, right? You can't just get them up to code and think that's going to work. And I'll move over to the model and I'll just show you what I mean about why I'm kind of not sure how to handle that, right? So here's the model. Here's the bring to code option, right? And so I've got the $48 million for, I can't recall, I think that's Cutler, and 46 million here for Winthrop, right? And we are going to be getting a grant, but a much smaller grant, we're assuming from SBA in 2034 in 7 years, that 26.6. So the question I have here is this number right here, right? Long-term maintenance that's going to have to be invested in Cutler and Winthrop if they're only brought up to code, but we still have to replace their roofs, and we still have to replace their HVAC, and we still have to deal with security concerns, and we still have to just have a replace the playground and the grounds, all that stuff, right, of both buildings. And when I said, okay, well then let's just take the difference, right? So 209 million less the 46 and less the 48 means that you have to put another $115 million into those buildings over 20 years, right? In increased maintenance versus a new building, and all these other things that are happening, right? And if I say, okay, well, how much does that cost, right? What is the rate? So the rate in the future is 3.5%. Number of periods is 20 years. right? And the amount of money that we're going to have to invest in a present value, right, is that, whoops, is that 115, right? That says that we're going to have to put an annual bond. Like that's how it's like investing $8 million every single year out of pocket without any help from the state. Like that, I don't see the town doing that. I don't see the town coming up with another $8 million, which is, even more than this as proposed, right? The, 92 million versus one. Like, I don't see that as it's something that anybody would choose to do. Right. And so I said, well, I don't know what to do with this number. Eric's saying we're gonna have to put in a lot of money in the town in those two buildings. I said, well, what if we decide, we're only gonna do half that much? This is, this is just trying to come up with something that might be palatable, right? And that's that 405 that you see here, right? And
I'm sorry, who is Eric?
Eric's the superintendent,
Okay.
right? And I'm saying, okay, I don't see the towns investing $8 million a year, in those, fixed code the buildings once they're up to code. I just I don't see it. So I cut it in half. But I don't even know that I believe $4 million, right, is something that the town would happily elect to pay every year for 20 years. All right. And I said, well, what happens if I mess around with this 4.05 number? Right. And that is this sensitivity analysis in the back here, right, with Cutler and Winthrop, where I said sensitivity of the proposed to change the Cutler and Winthrop annual self-funded. So that's the 405 in the model. If it goes all the way down to $2 million a year, right, you can see that that's a $30 million decrease in the net present value, right? It's another $30 million if you go from 4 to 6. So this is a number that I have like the least confidence of in our model, in my model, right now, is how to handle the fact that you have upgraded these buildings, but it costs $3 million to do an HVAC in one building now. There'll be another $3 million to do it in the other building, in the second building, right? What are you saying it is right now, Jeff? For the much smaller town hall, new HVAC is going to be $1.2 million in today's
Yeah, I
model?
mean, what you'll see on the capital list is technically more than that, but just a replacement of the existing system is going to be, 1.2 to 1.5 million.
Like, how do I, how do I do this? So I'm not even sure that I'm not sure I like it because I have it accelerating with construction inflation, which maybe is not the right thing to do. Like this can't be right.
And like, what would make you feel better about your assumptions if Eric just like literally gave us a list of these are the line items that we're gonna have to invest, and this is the number?
What would make me comfortable?
Because I agree, like it's so like you're putting your like I think you're making like good faith assumptions here, but like you're being given nothing to work on.
Like I'm just saying, all right, well, we've got to invest another $115 million in those buildings over 20 years is the only
Yeah.
guidance I've got. And how would we handle that? Would we assume that we get 50% grant to fix the building from MSBA for this project in the future? Like I'm trying to come up with a viable option here.
Yeah. I just like I sit here just say that like I agree with you also though we're like this just seems like a really unserious number we're being given from the school district. And this is not me saying like, it's really 65 or something. It just feels like a number that just threw out that's really big.
My
Okay.
naive assumption was that that's bringing it up to code was what all these costs were all about. And I don't understand. I now no longer understand what quote, bringing it up to code, unquote, actually means relative to what the superintendent is throwing out.
So let me see if I can explain what my understanding is, right? That none of the buildings as they stand now comply with ADA, right? And so, door widths are wrong, there's no ramps, access, safety, those sorts of things, right? And so to I believe it includes stuff like making it safe, like asbestos removal, right, from the buildings. But if I think you've experienced with these schools, right? You've walked through these schools. The classroom doors, some of them to go to the next classroom, you have to leave the building, right? And they're not built like a modern school is with controlled access, right? They are not. We have kids, I think, in the Winthrop school where classrooms are actually on the stage of the auditorium because they don't have enough classrooms as is. So you'd have, to upgrade to build a new to do this full 2-school upgrade in 7 years. That includes basically making the school large enough to handle the number of kids that are currently there so that they all have a classroom, right? And there is an art room, like there's no library at Winthrop because they've gotten rid of it and turned it into a classroom because they need a classroom, right? So the difference between the 96 million here, this additional 115 million across the 2 schools is, right sizing the school and dealing with some of these security concerns that we have now in schools.
Would we be better off staying with what you have now, which is conservative from the point of view of, recommending this option, and then in a narrative address, the potential future costs? Because it already fails. If anything, that looks better in presentation than, raising all the expenses, and someone can say, well, you raised the expenses for the purpose of destroying the option. So if you stay with a more conservative number with a narrative that all these things could happen, I think it actually plays out better in terms of explaining to people.
Yeah, I agree that that's where I was going with. There's a break point there, I guess. Like even if you if you take the number at face value from the superintendent and cut it back by 50%, I'm speaking off the cuff, it's still, as Bob said, it still fails, right?
Yeah, it does still fail. It's
So
much
that being the case, by basically saying in your graph, okay, and I'm paraphrasing, given these, the school has estimated that the additional, over and above code improvements, will cost an additional X 100 million over the next 10 years, full stop. Even if that number is cut back dramatically by, such as, 50%, the expenditures required to maintain the facilities, pending, a new school are still, render the option of a brand new school today better. In other
Yeah, I
words,
think that's what I'm
wouldn't.
getting wrapped around the axle on too. It feels like we're doing a lot of detail work when it's
Yeah.
a no-brainer given this significant
Yeah,
number.
I wouldn't want, because unless the break point was like, well, if we cut this back by 10 million, the break point makes this a better option, then we have to worry. But it doesn't. We're not even close to that.
right. So for instance, if I could change, I'll mess around with the model and I'll try two things, I think. One of them is this number starting at 8, right? And then maybe I might do straight line at 8, where it's 8 all the time, right? Because this is above 8 by the time it gets to the end because of inflation, right? So assuming that it does what you guys are describing, it's, cutting it in half already kind of still doesn't solve the inherent unreasonableness of this
Yeah,
option.
it doesn't render it a superior option.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right, let me go back to this deck here. All right, so I'll wordsmith in here on that. On this section here about the $4 million annual investment. All right, so this is the cash flows with the numbers as you just saw on that on the Excel file that I sent over to you guys, right? So this is basically saying 113 million, 234, 255, 161. These numbers are undiscounted, and these are different discount rates that are out there that you might, as a resident, say, how much money is it? How much more value do I attach to keeping the money in my pocket now as opposed to paying sometime in the future, right? And so as I think about these numbers here, 3% is the inflation rate that that the U.S. government has kind of been targeting, 3% or lower inflation rate, right? And so we were at that or better for a decade, right? 8% is the long-term rate of return of the stock market, right? Pre-tax, right? 6% might be the post-tax rate of return, right? And then you got these much higher numbers that might be the inflation numbers, or if you're a person who just wants the money in their pocket now and doesn't care about future you, future me's, that's future me's problem, you know. So I've put this box around this middle one because that's the one that I'm running with. Is I had to pick something to do sensitivity analysis on. I don't know where your heads are at on these these discount rates.
I mean, it's 100% debt finance, so then wouldn't you use the rate of the debt?
So that's like 3.5 to 5%.
I'm just thinking the WACC and whatever my back to finance class, and our investment banker friend on the phone probably has a lot better insight than I do.
So
Yeah, I mean, I'd think just from consistency's sake too, if we're assuming construction inflation is like that's 3 to 5, yeah, bond interest is 3.5 to 4. Probably makes sense. Like, oh, why using the 6? And like, not that it actually really materially changes the numbers, but or the final decision, but probably makes sense to go a little bit lower in terms of discount.
box up here. So one of the reasons that I've pushed the discount rate out towards 6% is that the as proposed becomes less competitive the further you push that discount rate on, right? So you are hamstringing the as proposed the further to the right you make this, right? You can see, for instance, between 6 and 7%, they flip, right? And you probably have a lot of residents that are really interested in keeping the cash in their pocket and just pushing the problem out 7 years, right? So if
I
we
guess
said, hey,
that's the
we're
other
going to
way
use
to think about it. It's sorry to interrupt you, but it's not how much it's not how the project is financed. It's how we as investors in the project are looking at our money and what the whatever risk adjusted rate of return is for our money. I don't know how to think about it actually, because if you do that, then it's way different.
Yeah, well, Bob actually raised that point to me that really, every single person with a vested interest in this project has their own, discount rate, and it's like, well, yeah, that is really kind of true. But obviously it'd be tough for us to model that.
Well, the
But
problem
I
with
guess what I'm saying is the project itself bears a return for us, the citizens, and it's still the project risk profile that drives the discount rate, and we're all individually investing in it. So I'm just flipping what I'm saying, and let's call it 100% equity financed by us, basically. In which case, if I was investing in a government building that I had a benefit from, I don't know, maybe it's still a low interest rate, maybe it's still a low discount rate. Sorry, I'm just talking myself in circles.
Yeah, I know.
When Jeff and I talked, the thing that I tried to do was view the town as a pass-through organization. And that gets us back to how individual folks look at it. And, you know, you've got people who are living around inflation, people who are in CDs, maybe getting a little more, people in the market getting 8. And then you've got, unfortunately, the people who may have a real high and effective discount rate because we're taking, with the project, taking food off their table. And I was a little disturbed to see the fraction of 1/12 residents or households in Wenham are food challenged. So, you know, that, you know, in terms of getting the project, you know, looked at by the residents, you know, people can have a whole spectrum of how they look at the thing and what they're willing to give up for the future. So, you know, I just wanted to share that.
Right. If
Well,
you need
the
the money
other
right
thing
now, you will push it out to that 12%. Your own personal thing is, I need the money now. So go ahead, Jared.
Well, I was just going to say that the retry 1 and retry 2, I think those discount rates are even 12 in terms of risk reward is acceptable because, you know, it's not a slam dunk that the government reapproves the grant. I mean, who knows where the Commonwealth is going to be in, you know, 7 to 10 years. Not in a good place it would be my sense. So you know, are you willing to run the risk for your children and grandchildren that you got no building, you limp along for 7 to 10 years and get nothing?
Mm-hmm.
So that militates. In other words, I know you want to perhaps tie the discount rates to to the cost of debt, but the uncertainty around, you know, the put option to the MSB, whatever the state, is fairly high, in my opinion. And that can't be quantified, but all the more reason, you know, not to go there.
I don't have anything explicit in the deck right now about you know, we don't know anything. Like we can't be sure about like the macro, right? I think at the most I've said is you know, that there's risk, right? I think in the recommendations,
Right.
right? You know, the town has to assume additional risk related to cost inflation, interest rates, and the timing to be allowed back in the MSBA. Like you might argue that we need to have stronger language there, warning people about, you know, the uncertainty of expecting, you know, to be able to predict what's available, what our options really are in 7 years.
I think if you replace timing with what, Finya, I think you hit the nail on the head. Just replace it with with a high degree of uncertainty as to, you know, because timing implies, you know, hey, you know, we get in line again, you know, we say hi and they hand us a check.
I might actually say the uncertainty around future MSBA funding, because there's a couple pieces, right? Are we even going to be allowed back in? But even being allowed back in, we don't know what it's going to look like in the future. Maybe it would be at 80% or something. It could still be a reduced amount.
Yeah,
That's what I was trying to say.
like I almost wonder, like you want this discussion that we're having, like as a group in the appendix, saying like we would actually argue the discount rate for these projects should be higher. The current project, because you have the grant in hand, discount rate should be lower. We're using consistent number just so that it's kind of clear for everybody. But in our opinion, the discount rate should actually be higher, making these, you know, the punter putting it off projects less attractive. But again, like more discussion on kind of the thought process of the discount rate in the appendix.
Yeah, so the way I was thinking about it, and David, you were cutting out a little bit at the end, is that my own personal discount rate as a voter is not the food insecurity type person, right? But it's also not all the way down here at nil inflation, right? If I had $1 in my hand, right? And I like you know, if I could put it in the market, I could expect to get a net 6%, right? Right now, which is where I'm kind of my own, you might set your own personal discount rate. The question about the uncertainty is more about like, is this $161 million, you know, how reliable is that? Right? That may be that there is no grant, right? And that's more like $261 million, right?
That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, so put some discussion of that into an appendix, just saying the uncertainty around these other projects just even higher than we're kind of like making. Because
Okay.
like I think your like chart does a really nice job laying out for kind of people at different levels. I'm probably a little lower than you on 6%, but yeah, I see your point. So it allows people to make their own choices.
Okay. So different residents. Also riskiness of riskiness of yeah.
Yeah, because I don't know, Finn, if there's almost like a bandwidth there. Like if you look at where it flips, you know, the proposed project's at 68.4 and the retry one school is 66.4. So, you know, you're looking at a $2 million difference. And given the volatility, like, is that $2 million difference, you know, do we have enough certainty in the future outcomes that you know, we'd make our pick based on only a $2 million difference between the two projects? You know, I think they're really closer than the 2 million difference because of the volatility around, you know, a bunch of different variables.
That's exactly the point I was trying to make, is that yeah. I mean, if somebody actually reads this and says, well, wait a minute, it's only 66 as opposed to 68. To which I would immediately pop up, yes, but you have a new school. You don't necessarily have a new school under that option.
All right. So I'll put a page into the appendix, and I'm sure we'll be wordsmithing that in the future. All right. So this is the recommendation page. All right. So here, least expensive path as proposed is more known, stable, less risky costs. Assume additional risks related to cost inflation, interest rates, uncertainty, availability of funding. And then this is Jared, sort of your point, right? The towns will still have to bring Cutler and Winthrop up to code at the same cost, right, as if they had just one school, right, or outlay more than twice as much to fully renovate them, right? And so rendering the opinion based solely on the cost, we vote yes, or we recommend yes. And then I don't know, any comments on that before I go into the appendix?
I know we're going to do a slide that, you know, ties everything together vis-a-vis the cost to taxpayer,
Mhm.
you know, on a hypothetical, I don't know, $10,000 tax bill.
Mhm.
But I would ultimately, I think once that slide is prepared, there might be a sentence that goes in on on the recommendation that says, based solely on the cost of the project, you know, the incremental tax, you know, it's the least bad option, meaning that the incremental tax liability benefit cost is worth the benefit that we're going to receive once the slide is prepared on the tax cost.
Yeah, maybe we're getting at similar things with what you just said, but I'm going back to what I said earlier in the previous meeting about falling on my sword. Like, I don't want to stand up and say that I vote yes to approve the new school. So, and I know we don't have to be unanimous on this, and that's fine, because in principle, I don't support moving ahead with the new school. I support making this kind of the hill to die on and us figuring out how to make our town viable for the long term with massive changes somehow. So, it'd be nice if there was a way to kind of caveat that or soften that or revise that language along the lines of what you just said. to make it explicitly clear, like we're looking at these cost trade-off alternatives, and you kind of do that in there, Finn, but
Yeah, so the language right now is with the alternatives that we've articulated, we're not aware of a cheaper way. Right?
that's
I know
different. That's a different statement from we approve building the new school. I'd be open to saying our math shows that there's not a cheaper way to achieve these outcomes. Well,
Yeah,
of the
or some,
alternatives we've looked at, but I still wouldn't vote for building a new school or any of the options that we've addressed.
something to the effect of we acknowledge that all of the options represent a substantial increase to the tax rate for the citizens of Wenham, full stop. However, we vote yes because of the benefits, because the new school option while providing additional costs provides us the tangible benefit of a new state-of-the-art educational facility. In other words, we're getting something for the money out the door as opposed to just, shoveling cash into the operating account.
So Dano, I know you've expressed this opinion in person and in meetings on this topic or others. The thing that I'm going to challenge you on, right, is that as we've gone through this process, you haven't disagreed with the numbers that we are seeing are the other viable options to date, right? The costs of X or Y or what have you, right? Your objection, I think, is just the fundamental increase that's occurring throughout, throughout the town and in the cost to live here, right? In terms of property taxes, right? But I don't hear from you another alternative. Like if someone comes up to you and says, why didn't you vote for the new school? And if your answer is because it was too expensive, right? I I don't have a lesser expensive option for you. Like I don't have anything. I don't have like it would force us into more expensive options if you vote no.
Yeah, mine, it is the least expensive options of the ones that we're considering, but what I shared and I'm not going to convince, like, we don't need to argue about this. It's okay. I'm good with where I'm at, and I don't have to agree that, we don't have to be unanimous on this, so that's okay too.
Right.
I'm saying we as two towns need to do away with our small school system and district and merge it with another major town in order to remain viable as a town. And now's the time to do that. And we should figure it out really fast. And this is a great forcing function to force us to do that.
Right. I'm just trying to think about what what you might be able to put together in a reasonably short period of time that demonstrates that as a viable option, either just financially.
Well, I mean, just the just the sniff test of get rid of our entire school district overhead and have all our students under someone else's district overhead. You just saved all that money
So when
and
you say
maximize
overhead,
capacity utilization of another district's buildings.
so that would be I'm just trying to explore this further to figure out how to handle this, right? So like there are other schools in surrounding towns, right, of from Hamilton Wenham, and assuming they have capacity, right, the idea would be to send all of our kids to those schools, and we of course would get a bill from those other districts for educating the kids. But the major benefit, I think, would be that you wouldn't have the administration of a school district. So you wouldn't need a superintendent and, you know, all of that sort of stuff on top. You would still need an incremental number of teachers and what have you to do that. So the consolidation, the economies of scale would be at the top, right?
That plus the capacity is not optimized in a smaller number of schools. You have way more opportunity to optimize capacity with CapEx and teachers and everything else if you have 1,000 schools than you do if you have 2 schools.
So thinking about one of the things that somebody from the school committee said at one of our quintuple meetings was, if somebody's school choices into the district, or no, if somebody's school choices out of our district, we pay something like 30,000. But I think the quantum's kind of right. Whereas like the cost to actually like educate somebody in our school district is like $25,000 or something. It's more expensive for us to send somebody out of district than it is to actually teach somebody in district. Is it like, first of all, like, does anyone, is what I'm saying like correct? Am I remembering kind of the
You cut
statement
out a little bit there,
properly?
Dave. I think you cut out there. I don't know. Jeff, you've got some numbers in your head?
Okay.
Yeah, so David, yeah, I think you're kind of referencing sort of the discussion about school choice. And so school choice is, you know, when a kid from Ipswich can, through the school choice program, come to school in Hamilton Wenham. And the way that the state handles that is we would receive $5,000 from Ipswich for that student. You know, the district did throw out something around $25,000 a student as what the Department of Education calls our per student cost. Now, that number, it can be somewhat misleading because if you have a classroom, if you have a second grade classroom that has 17 kids in it, and we can have, you know, up to 22 kids, there's very little extra cost to that student being in the room. Going from 17 to 18 students, your cost doesn't really increase, but you get $5,000. Where you run into problems with school choices, if you let too many school choice kids into your district, and then you have a spike in your own student population, and you now have the you know, that next year you have 26 kids, and now you need a whole other classroom, you know, in part because you took that $5,000 student. There's a disconnect there. To get to sort of what Dano's talking about a little bit, I guess I could use Nahant as an example here. So Nahant only educates kids, I think now through 5th grade. I think 6th grade through 12th now goes to Swampscott public schools. And it's not a school choice arrangement. It is something the town's negotiated where Swampscott has agreed to pay, or excuse me, Nahant has agreed to pay Swampscott something like $16,000 a student to send their students there. Now, the per student cost for Swampscott is probably 24 or 25, just like it is for us. But certainly them receiving 16,000, you know, rather than 5 is a material difference for them, and it makes it sort of worthwhile for them. And they clearly must have the capacity and things in their buildings and everything that allow for that to be viable. So, you know, to sort of come at it the way I think Dano was describing, if you were to say, you know, Danvers or Beverly, who some other district next to us that has more capacity, if we could enter into an agreement with that district and say, would you take all Wenham students at, you know, $16,000 a student? You know, we could in that instance, you know, save, you know, anywhere from, you know, $8,000 to $9,000 a student on our end. And, you know, get rid of all, you know, all of that overhead and building maintenance and everything like Dano is, you know, sort of describing. A couple of challenges there, just, you know, sort of logistically, you know, we are in a district with Hamilton. So, you know, there's more to it than just saying, okay, well, we think we're going to do Danvers next year. We'd have to negotiate with them on how, you know, sort of splitting up the district might work. I think what could be challenging is, you know, Wenham as the smaller part of the district, you know, we probably could absorb into Beverly or Danvers or something. Hamilton is a much bigger part of the district. I think merging our whole district into another contiguous town would probably be difficult, just because that would be a pretty large load of schools. I don't know if,
We
you know,
also
like a Beverly.
we also
Yeah.
don't need to we're also married to this shared district concept and whatever rules were agreed to between the two towns related to the district, and there has to be one school in each town and stuff like that. Like, let's just rip that all up and start over again and say, where should all the kids go to school to optimize their education and economics?
Yep. Yeah, I guess I was just thinking maybe we'd almost be better off on our own than we were together. Like certainly I think Wenham would have a much easier time as a smaller district to part and go somewhere else. Because
I think I'm
we've got the
agreeing. I think
cities.
I'm saying the same thing, Jeff. Yeah,
Yeah.
like let's just assume that we could find a
Yeah.
way to negotiate that with Hamilton, either by extricating ourselves from this partnership, or we do it mutually, or however we want to split it up. But it's just paperwork and negotiations.
Yeah, and I think, and this is probably kind of your point is, if if you believe the model doesn't work, this is the time to make that decision before you commit to another 20-year, bond or whatever that, is going to be, you need to pay. Because that is the other thing, if we take on that debt, you couldn't in a year get out. I mean, you could negotiate your way out of the district, but at that point you would be legally obligated to, your whatever 35% share of that debt over the next 20 years, and there's really not a whole lot of return. You do own a share of some of these buildings, but if they depreciate and things like that, you'd be on the hook for a lot more debt than you would be getting money for a share of a building or things
I
like
mean,
that.
that's what I would argue. Yeah, now once we're pregnant, then we're down the path, and it's going to be hard to revisit this. And this is now everybody's desperate because the schools are falling apart. And I'm not a brinksmanship kind of negotiator, and I know this is pie in the sky what I'm talking about because I don't think it's going to go anywhere. But this is the time because of all the confluence of the variables to really pressure the towns to get serious about what they're going to do with their future and the future of the district and the buildings and everything else. Like, or hey, we're not going to do this. Sorry, Eric. Sorry, citizens. Like, we need to have a real hard conversation about how to change our trajectory before we do this. Now, in all reality, if we did build a building and we did have the debt and we did want to still merge with some other district, then we would just have a new building to contribute to that partnership, and that new building could become utilized by their students, or however it could still get parsed out somehow. So, but it does seem like a good time to have this, have a come to Jesus kind of session. If there was a time, it would be before we built this building, seems like.
Okay. Um, I'm just not sure how to incorporate that into a discussion and kind of a I'm not sure that this is not like there's a dissenting opinion in a Supreme Court where you get to kind of explain your reasoning. It's just going to be that there's, one out of the five finance committee members has voted against it. Or
Right.
if there might be another person on the committee here who hasn't spoken up, but
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you could, I mean, with the math Jeff just did, you could throw together an option that says $22,000 a student versus $16,000 a student and merge with whoever, and our net savings is, we have a net. I mean, you
Well,
could throw it up there as a conceptual option because it's the best option from a cash flow standpoint
well,
in
I
a
go back to
hypothetical scenario.
our original remit, which is keeping in mind that we are appointed, not elected. And I completely acknowledge Dano's point about, the future of the district. But that is a topic for our elected officials. Our remit is the cost of what's been proposed. It's not reject based on a qualitative, decision that we have to basically change the district. I mean, I'm not elected, I'm appointed to analyze the costs. So I don't think it's appropriate for us to backdoor a legitimate political decision as part of this analysis.
Yeah, I don't disagree. That's why I was saying maybe there's just a way to revise the wording on this and say that what we're voting for, what we're agreeing to is that the math is calculated correctly and that option one is the
Yeah,
better
that's what I thought we were
economic
doing.
of the three options. Well, it's
Yeah.
different from that last statement that says approve the new school.
So what language might you propose here? Can you help me?
Just a very much exactly representing what we're doing or what we're saying we're doing, which is the FinCom.
So
The
is this,
FinCom agrees that the lowest cost option is to build, of these options, is to build a new school now or whatever?
Well,
Or is
I would
option one?
say from a cost benefit perspective, it is the best option for the taxpayer.
that of the options available or considered?
Yeah.
I mean, I
Um,
do struggle with it a little bit, but because, I mean, what I'm saying, it is an option. It's seems impossible and it's political backdoor, like you said, Jared, but it's an option. It's an economic option. So I'm not pushing to include it. It just sounds a little disingenuous if we say this is the best economic option, because we're not really, it's not necessarily, we just haven't presented the more radical option.
so
I would
Jeff,
say
can
the
you,
Wenham FinCom agrees from a cost. I like the wording cost benefit because again,
do
we're
we have
making an
benefits
investment
here?
in a
You
building.
know,
It's
Well, the
not
benefit is you have a
benefits.
new building, like
The
Jared
benefit is
said.
you have a new building, and so from where the other options, you may or may not get a new building. And so from a cost to benefit, it is a cost benefit analysis, not just a cost analysis.
Right, as long as we're talking about only financial benefits,
Financial
right? Because I'm
benefits.
trying
Yes,
to,
we are. We made that clear from the start that we weren't debating the qualitative aspects of one or two schools.
so can you give me that sentence again, please? Jared?
Okay, let's see. Renting opinion based solely. Okay. I would say rendering an opinion based solely upon the a cost benefit analysis of the options proposed by the school committee and our elected officials.
Well, we've made up these three. We have not, like, these three, there are 12 other options, right, that they went through. We've picked these three as the most viable. Right? The select board didn't tell us, didn't say, hey, if we reject this, pick these three, tell us about these other three. They said,
No, but
what are,
they did. Okay, we were given a bunch of options and we were asked to evaluate them, right?
Yeah.
By the school committee and our elected officials.
Can you just say of the options evaluated here?
Or the most viable options evaluated or something, yeah.
I think most viable doesn't really address what we did because we didn't reject any other options as being non-viable.
so is this,
Analysis of the options presented to the numerous options presented to the FinCom.
I think you're mixing up the options that the school committee considered versus the options that are left having already gone ahead and applied to the state. So we're using data from the options they considered, but we can't go back to all the options because we can't apply tomorrow and just replace the current proposal with, say, a proposal for one new school. So they're new options, even though we're using old data, because the old options apply to the decision that was made by the school committee.
But I still think from a pure like viability perspective, like in my mind, like you have these choices. It's the renovate, wait a couple of years, do the super school again, or kind of do the two school. Like I'm not sure any taxpayer would say like, oh, there is something else that's been presented after we signed $1 million bond.
I mean, I don't think anybody's going to criticize us for saying, well, there were 25 options presented and you only discussed 3. I don't think anybody's going to do that. So I do think it's as Jeff said, people want to know that the FinCom, you know, tested everything. So we did. Okay. So rendering an opinion based solely on the cost benefit of the various options presented to the FinCom. Okay. You don't have to make a distinction that, well, guess what? We only pulled out 3. If they want to have that debate, fine. But
I think presented is a problem because they weren't presented to us.
yes, they were. They were presented to the entire world. They're on the website of the school committee. I pulled them all off and looked at all of them. Okay, and yeah, while they could have done a better job explaining why they chose what they chose, we are where we are, and we did have access to that information.
That's true, but at this point, some of the things that are in that set are not really options.
There were more expensive Cutler and Winthrop options, right? We've just picked the least expensive, right? To make
Who's
it
going to criticize us for that?
right.
Can
Yeah,
you
so
just
that's my
couch this and say with options presented with with some assumptions made by the FinCom, like to and that's how you sort of get around, like it's not exactly what was presented to us because we the 20 versus 10 million or whatever assumption, like Finn worked his way through that. Is that your workaround?
I think like
I
once
do agree. Like we want them to think we didn't go out and just look at the universe of possible ways to optimize our school district. I think that's worth, like we took options that were
presented to us.
presented to us, given to us, available to us somehow, like within our scope to consider, whatever.
You want to say like in scope options or something like that?
I would just say various. I mean, anybody who's really interested in this thing has all the decks that are on the school's website. Okay, they know that there were 20 different things. If they're like me, they read the April minutes and they know that there was a meeting where the school committee itself narrowed down the options and then threw them over the transom to us.
So we've got these various options. There are 14 or so, right? The difference between what they've done and what we're doing is they've narrowed it down to 1 and saying it's happening now. And we're saying, okay, to walk to any of the other options that you have considered, these things will have to happen and they're expensive.
Right. We did in my opinion, very good faith analysis of, prove it to me, so to speak, by looking at the other options.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, adding any more modifiers to the sentence, I think would just somewhat discredit the work we've done. Like having read like bond opinions and stuff, it's just like the more of these you add, the worse it is.
Yeah.
All right, so we're at 10:41 right now. So how about I'm not asking you guys to vote on this yet. I think it's probably within a week or two. I've got a bunch of red tags here in the upper right to work on. My plan is to figure out how to put numbers in the bottom right-hand corner so that I can refer people to slide X, right? And I'll work on these sensitivity analysis pages to give us some more space in the appendix to work on some language.
Finn, can I make just a general suggestion about the appendix?
Sure.
I would make even if you end up with more pages, make the items bigger, because one of the problems, if you go through, various presentations, you can't read them. So we
Hmm.
want people to read what we've got. And
Okay. Understood. Put this at the very top.
Hey, Finn, on the PowerPoint, if you just go to print,
Mhm.
when the print thing comes up, there's edit header and footer as an option, and you can insert slide numbers there.
Okay.
But I guess that won't do it on a screen though.
Yeah. Okay. I knew it's supposed to be in header and footer somewhere, and I could not find the header and footer button anywhere here. So sorry, guys. Okay. Is there any further discussion that folks want to have about the new school project?
No, the one thing I'll say on my side is I think I'd have a preference to vote on this next week if we were comfortable on the numbers. Partially for kind of personal travel reasons, and partially because I think it'd be helpful to like have something ready to go and kind of be out in the community sooner with our information.
When are we getting the final numbers from the school committee, or did they come in?
They probably won't be in until right at the end of this week at the earliest, but I've got an email into Vinny on the issuance costs. David brought that up last week, and so when I follow up with him on that, I will ask him, hey, do we have those numbers yet? And I think probably Finn or I will need to, try and coordinate with Hamilton to some degree a little bit too, to, get back to being, at least at a high level, being at sort of on the same page.
So that may not.
Sorry, you cut out there, David.
No, I said my timing may not be possible, and that's fine.
Okay. Well, we might try to get your we'll need to get your vote officially somehow. So we'll work on that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So it's been an hour and 45 minutes here, guys. Sorry for going way long. I don't know if we've got one other thing on the agenda, which is talking about the operating budget. And I think the major news here is not a change in the numbers, but the work that Jeff's been doing to help compare the cost of running the town versus our neighbors. And there's a file that you sent over, Jeff.
Yeah, and I've had discussions with a few folks either on the phone or via email, and so what I sent around the other day, very much like first pass. I would explain it as that's the sort of easily available information that the state provides. We all report up to them, and they report it back to us. So you compare and contrast. A few of you brought this up of, the next step I think now is, so let's just use West Newbury as a town that's by us, has a similar population. Size-wise, they might be a little bit bigger, but they compare favorably to us. They tend to seem to have lower cost structures in a lot of areas. And so I think, what I want to do is, I think in the summary notes, kind of gave you guys some instances of, these communities are favorable, or we're favorable to these communities and not others. I want to sort of reach out to these people and get a little bit more, real direct knowledge of, staffing at the police, staffing at town hall, why, what leads to them being maybe less expensive in certain areas, but also comparing and contrasting town policies where, I think I've mentioned before, Wenham has some commitments to open space and trees and things that, cost us money because the town has at some point or another voted towards policies and actions that are committed to these types of things, which maybe some of these other communities don't have. But I do think there's a point where if we could quantify, well, it's good to have a commitment to open space, or it's good to want to have a nice library or whatever, but maybe these decisions were made, years ago, several years ago, a few years ago, whatever it might be. Does anybody actually know the cost of having a more robust library, or having a bit more commitment to open space, and maybe allow residents to reevaluate, well, yeah, I thought the library was important to me, but if I realize all those extra hours at the library or something like that are costing me, and this would be an outrageous estimation, but it costs me $1 on my tax rate to have a more robust library. Maybe I'm not committed to it as much, and I'm not trying to single out any particular department. I happen to like Kim and think she does a really nice job over there. But I do think maybe, as we've heard on this call tonight, folks are concerned about what is the long-term trajectory of this town. I think it's helpful to maybe start understanding what are some of those cost drivers, and in a majority, what are those, sort of policies and things that folks want to continue to support, and ones that maybe they're not as interested in supporting, to try to rein in, what looks like the ongoing growth of the running the town. So, I guess a long way of saying, that was kind of the first pass, but like that is my sort of plan, is to maybe talk to some of my counterparts to figure out, hey, how are you doing that cheaper than us? What are, and maybe, certainly maybe there are things we can learn, from another town that we can implement. And there may be things that we look at and say, well, given some of the policies we have in Wenham, there'd be no way for us to, reach that level of staffing or something like that. But I think certainly, like I pointed out, like a town like Boxford, in total dollars spends less on police than we do, and they're double our population and double or triple our size, depending on road miles or land area. Certainly that's worth exploring, and we could have, Chief DiNapoli, look at that and talk to his counterparts. And there may be, I know there's a lot of sort of 95 that goes through Boxford. The chief could come back and say, well, yeah, you have to understand that the state police cover a good chunk of Boxford, and that's why they're able to operate at a lower cost. And, that's not an option for us. But I think, we sort of owe it to residents to start, figuring out why there's these variances and explaining them in a way that, hopefully, the residents understand and accept, or, I think there will be some where they say, no, we'd like to see you make a change here. You seem overstaffed, or we should be committed to something a little, less robust here or there. So that's sort of my take on it, but I'm happy to hear other folks' take.
I guess I'm looking at 3 deadlines again, Jeff, which is, we've got an official vote by this committee to approve the operating expenses of the town, right? We've got whatever we're going to be putting in the warrant book, and then whatever we're going to be saying in April. And if we're going to be using this information you've collected, like how and when are we going to use it, right? Because I feel like we're less than a month away before we really have a deadline for those first 2 items, an opinion and whatever goes in the warrant book. And so I want to have that discussion. I want to see it up on the screen. I want to talk about, us versus these other towns, right? And figure out, like, does that inform our vote, right? Does that inform our budget this year or not, right? Or is it just informational stuff that we'd put into the warrant book and say, this has just lately become available to us, and we have no comment on it yet, besides the fact that, we recognize some of these towns are more or less expensive than us, and we'll be investigating them for next year.
Yeah, I think I might look at it as it's maybe a little bit of a multi-year thing, that, you're not going to be able to dissect every single department under our budget and affect some sort of change by, the end of February or whatever. But maybe you could pick 1 or 2 things where we could take some of that information and make a recommendation back saying, based on this, we think we maybe could make some of these changes. I mean, you'd obviously run into some potential resistance from, say, the select board, because they, as Jared mentioned earlier, they're the elected officials who create policy, and some of our recommendations might be sort of, treading on that policy. But I still think, it might not be a huge change that it impacts, but I think on some departments it could impact what we do before we make a final decision. But certainly it could go into, this is what came up with Jeff Calder last year in terms of what made it into the warrant booklet, which is what gets mailed out for town meeting. And then what is going to be this budget software sort of supplemental budget data, we have much more free reign to create a much more detailed budget, supplemental budget document that folks could view, and we could start to lay out some of these things, and maybe it's not we've fixed them or made final recommendations, but here are things we're looking at. There's a whole section for comparative stuff where we could say, here's what we've recently learned, what we're working on, flushing out, and what we will, we look forward to, over the next year or two or three, whatever it is, adjusting our budgets to understand better why we're higher or lower in various areas. I mean, there might be some departments where I think we do pretty well, and maybe we, the comparisons sort of prove that out, and then you sort of say, well, how do we take what you're doing, let's just say in DPW, and and move that into other departments. But I guess just, that's the long way of saying, I don't know it's going to make a huge change for this budget, but I still think there's a chance it can make some.
Have we gotten the estimates from any of we asked kind of a couple meetings ago, like on the -5% budget?
Yeah, so I do have those. I can actually put up on a screen right now for you folks. FinCom analysis. No, it's this next page, reductions. So let me just share my screen.
Because I mean, I agree that it seems like we wouldn't be doing it justice by trying to say we even reviewed these numbers in a serious way, unless it's leverage to push one of the, somebody who's coming in very high to accept this -5% thing, actually affect like a real change. If that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, and I think that you could use, I mean, some of these budgets I think have been allowed to grow over time and haven't maybe been challenged in this way. So this could, be the time that you say, you're really pushing back on this 5% cut. But boy, when we compare you to some local, what we consider comparative departments, they seem to be, meeting that target already. What can we do to, why is it a dire cut to everything in Wenham, but, someone else 2 towns over is operating at a lower cost than that already? And there's multiple factors that go into any of these different departmental budgets. But this, I'm thinking you're seeing on the screen now, it should be about $160-something thousand worth of changes. These are what have been put forth by various departments so far. And they range in sort of impact. So like if I look at this first one, the Council on Aging, Jim, the head of the Council on Aging, had said, well, yeah, I mean, to get to $8,000 of cuts, we could cut back on, the van driver budget, drop it from 31,000 down to, 24, 25,000, something like that. That's a real cut in their service provided. And so, the question would be, is that something that we would, advocate for or not? Are we so committed to a 5% sort of cut that's what we would do, or would we look at sort of the seniors who are to some degree an underserved portion of the tax-paying base, and hit their van service pretty hard in the grand scheme of things? Maybe that everyone will have different feelings on that or whatever. And then, just some other ones. I mean, in my department, for me, what it would come down to is a choice between cutting one of my staff people to half time or getting rid of this new budget software we just bought, to use this year. If as department head, I'm going to choose the getting rid of the software, which is, more of just a presentation tool, than, cutting one of the staff people that we just got added, within the last couple of years, as a full timer. That would be 20,000. Land use, which is really conservation and the planning department. We do have 2 employees up there. One of them is part-time. To get a 5% cut, you'd probably have to cut her, she makes about 53, you'd have to cut her 7,500 or so. So that's dropping down to 4,500. We do have some options there where she does a lot of work for the Wenham Affordable Housing Trust. So maybe we could offload some of that, that hourly charge to them. It is probably should be moved over there. It's a more direct cost of her time is directly attributed to that Wenham Affordable Housing Trust, which, for those of you who don't know, in addition to us like contributing to things like Maple Woods and things like that, we do also own I think 3 properties now, that, the town owns and rents out at an affordable housing, sort of rate. And a bunch of Margaret's time is spent on that, managing that, or whatever. We do have someone who like collects the rents and that kind of thing, but there's just a lot of time. So that might be a way we could save there. The library, and I think you guys heard her on the, the Saturday presentation we did. They've already made, as many cuts as they feel they can make, before they would start losing state funding and losing the ability to be part of the consortium that allows us to share materials and things like that. So I don't think, they don't feel it's viable to cut any further than they have. Police is looking at making, potentially, um, a total of about $33,000 with cuts. The biggest one being they have a part-time sort of retiree who does a lot of the inventory control work over there, and he does a lot of sort of he's kind of the gopher that does a lot of sort of tasks that would otherwise be done by an officer, at a rate that's almost, double, in some cases, or more if it's overtime or that kind of thing. So, they probably prefer to keep that. But if they had to cut something, they would cut that. They also think they could probably save another 7,500 in, miscellaneous and uniforms there. Um, Fire. Fire would cut about 70,000. The majority of that is they do have a new firefighter in the budget this year, a new full-time firefighter. They would cut that, and they would also cut back on overtime and replacing some batteries in the AEDs this year. But generally speaking, I haven't gotten full, sort of cuts from, like all the town hall departments and things like that yet. But, this would be $162,000 of the cuts. It wouldn't be nothing. It would, probably reduce the tax rate, whatever, 12, 13 cents or something like that. But that's the start of it. We're still, trying to get these folks to, other folks to hand this in. But that's, I think what most people are going to come back and tell you is, this will be a detrimental, cut to our services, and whether that's true across the board or not, I don't know. That's where I think the comparative data is helpful, because you can say, well, they're able to do it here and here. We must be able to find a way to do it, and then it'll be up to them to explain why we can't, why our cost structure is higher or whatever. I mean, we do have, unfortunately, you've got contractual obligations, union contracts, things like that, that if, if our union contract is worse than one of these comparative communities, that's sort of our reality, whether we like it or not. But I think it has to be, evaluated as well when we're in negotiations again. We can now see how much more we're paying than, sort of comparable communities in our area. We need to address this in our negotiations. So I think that's the very quick, high level summary on the cuts. I mean, certainly there's more that could come, but all in, maybe you're getting to 200, 250 on the 5% cuts there, when everybody kind of turns their stuff in.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I was going to share tonight. Bob has a really nice spreadsheet he did on the overall budget that kind of gives you some trends on what's increased over the 3-year period from the actuals, and sort of what the expected inflation rate was versus how things grew. I don't know if we're already at 901, if we want to delve into something of that level at this point. I'm happy to do it, but I don't know what other folks are feeling. And the only other thing I have is that we did pull together the capital schedule today. We didn't have capital on our agenda. We only had operating budget. But I think just generally speaking, I'm going to send out the capital budget as soon as we get off the meeting. Typically, we fund capital in Wenham through free cash. Our free cash was certified a week or two ago at a $2,071,000. So, just under 2.1 million. The total capital requests came in. Right now, they're at a little over 1.2 million. So we certainly could absorb all of that under free cash. So there's no, concern that we'd have an override or anything like that to handle the capital. And that's also not to imply that we would, approve, every single one of these. You guys will have a chance to evaluate the projects, question folks to determine whether you think these are, absolutely necessary or not, whether they're, I always used to call it kind of wants versus needs analysis when the departments came to me in Essex. And some stuff was a clear need and other stuff, I would sort of say, well, this falls into the would be nice to have, category. But the biggest thing on this spreadsheet here that you see is about $1.2 million. There's $500,000 in here as a placeholder, because we're expecting to get a $500,000 grant for the HVAC system in this building. But we do sort of have to have a backup plan on how we would fund that if the grant were to fall through. They are competitive grants. We've opted to go with a geothermal heating system here at Town Hall because it increases the odds of getting a grant. And if we get the grants, even though the geothermal is a little bit more expensive, the grants doing it makes the grants more likely to for us to win those. So the net cost of going geothermal with the grants is really no more than just doing the sort of the traditional system that we have here now. And then it would also that would create longer term cost efficiencies for us down the road because the geothermal is more more efficient overall. And then Wenham has a pretty strong commitment to going green, as it were, moving forward. So I think even part of the master plan might touch on that. So the hope would be that the grant comes through and we don't even have to use that, and now we're only talking about $729,000 instead of $1,229,000. But I'll send this out, and we're building out a deck that kind of gives you pictures and explanations on each of these items that's been requested, and we'll put it on the agenda for next time to walk through any questions you might have on those. So that was what I had. Like I say, I'm happy to talk in more detail about Bob's sort of analysis of the trends if folks want to stick around and do that.
I would propose that we put on the agenda for next time so that it can be officially discussed, what you've got on the screen here, the CapEx.
Yeah.
That we have a file about where we are kind of collecting the future future expenses that we want to have the townsfolk aware of, right? That fourth thing on my list, right? And then we can also take a look at the file I think you said Bob put together for you.
Great.
And then of course we'll keep talking about the new school and maybe be ready to take a vote. So I'll be working on the model and the deck, but I'm not sure that those are 100% required for your vote. I think they're required for the warrant book and for communication out. But I don't know that they need to be in a final condition. But I think we all agreed that ahead of agreeing on a vote, we'd want to have something hardened up with the numbers, Jeff. So assuming those numbers become available, you said late this week or perhaps early next week.
Yeah, I mean, they were supposed to meet with MSBA on Monday. And then, it could be that MSBA takes, a couple of days to, come back. The big thing was, it was around the size of the cafeteria and the size of the gymnasium and how that would impact, what was reimbursable space versus what wasn't and all that. So, I mean, it's not a big number in the grand scheme of things. So hopefully that should be fairly quick, and we can get, if they've got a number by the end of the week, I mean, they can hand that to their fiscal advisor who helps with the bond, and get that turned around. But yeah, I'm going to ping Vinny again tomorrow on the issuance costs anyway. So I will throw that out there as well.
Okay, so that I'm proposing that we put these other things we've just discussed on the schedule for next week, perhaps at the same time.
Yeah.
And I don't know if any other topics we want to discuss or burning issues from now, or I don't know if there's still anybody from the public on the call.
I think just Emma, I think she's still here, but yeah, I think she was the only person we had.
Is there any way to
Okay.
go a little bit later next week, possibly? I'm just gonna be on the East Coast again, and so it'll be tough for me to make 7 o'clock.
So start a little later, you're saying?
That would help. Yeah, I still can't guarantee I can make it, but I will try.
Yeah. And David, later was okay for you, right? Like it's more the early stuff's harder for you.
Later is always better for me, so I can make any time later work.
What are you thinking, Dano? Is that 7:30 or 8 o'clock for you? Be better.
I guess 8 would be better, but I
Okay.
know it's getting late for everybody here, so.
Okay. So I'm okay with 8 o'clock.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
Would this
Okay.
be the 5th?
I know. I was like, I think we're in February now, right?
Yeah.
February 5th, yeah. Let me just double check my calendar here as well. I think I've got kid's birthday party I have to do on the 4th. Yep. So I should be
I
able to
can
do
do that.
Yep. Happy to do the 5th.
Great.
Okay, so I'm looking for a motion to close the Wenham Finance Advisory Board at 9:08 p.m. on the January 29th.
So moved.
Jared's move. I need a second. Looks like
Second.
Bob's raising his hand for a second. And any discussion? Not hearing any discussion. We'll move to a vote. Finn says aye.
Bob says aye.
Aye.
David,
Jared, David, aye.
NOI.
Dano, aye. Okay, any against? I don't think there's anybody else that gets to vote. No abstentions. Not hearing any. I call the meeting to close. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
See you next
Care.
week.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.